Good morning and welcome everybody. I'd like to call to order the 2017 MOA budget presentation by the mayor. Let's start with a roll call. We'll start at this.
Lance Glover, O&B Director.
Ethan Berkowitz, Mayor.
Mike Abbott, City Manager.
Bill Starr.
Pete Peterson.
Patrick Flynn.
Elby Gray Johnson.
Dick Trainee.
Bill Evans, Forrest Dunbar.
Amy Demboski.
Shirley Nelson, Chair, Budget Advisory Commission.
And it's not roll call, it's just an introduction. So in the audience,
Blake Essity, Channel 2.
Shannon Ballard, KTVA. Devin Kelly from EDN.
Chris Schutte, Director of Office Economic Community Development.
Dennis LeBlanc, Anchorage Fire Chief.
Chris Tolley, Police Department.
Lonnie Harris with Federation of Community Councils.
David Bersinger, AWW Treatment Director, Acting General Manager.
Megan Garzell, Employee Relations.
Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk.
Rose Foley, Country Back Analyst.
in the young lady in the corner over there. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the Assembly. We're excited to roll out this year's budget. I'm going to make some prefatory comments and then hand it over to Mr. Wilbur and Mr. Abbott. We are living in challenging times, and the historic relationship between the state and the municipality is causing us to evolve our thinking and how we prepare our budgets. And it will be a challenge, not just this year, but moving ahead. But on account of that, and on account of some internal cost pressures, we started off this process with a $40 million hole. And we started off that process with a $40 million hole through a combination of factors that developed at the state level and a combination of internal pressures. And Mr. Wilbur will go over those. The good news is that the 2017 budget was built on a 2016 budget that had significant savings in it. We will retain some of those savings. And unfortunately, anticipated revenues for the municipality came in, or projected to come in lower than we anticipated, and through a combination of belt tightening methods, we were able to save an additional $1.5 million this year. We also, in this upcoming year, are going to see something good happen, I hope, which is that SAP will be finished. The downside to SAP being finished is that there are additional costs associated with it coming online that we're going to have to absorb. There is one item in the budget that we felt was imperative to increase, and that's the size of the police department. And I say it's imperative to increase that because the police department had already been cut to a point where the public safety falls on unsafe levels. So this upcoming budget, you're going to see, as it will be rolled out, you're going to see an increase in the size of the police department so we can get to full strength, because public safety is a non-negotiable item. You're also going to see that we had significant cuts as part of the proposal that moved forward, additional efficiencies, some new revenues that we were able to find and bring online. And in all, we did what we were supposed to do. Came up with a budget that is going to result in a balanced budget. People of Anchorage are going to see some reduction of services as we absorb the cost cuts from the state, as we absorb these new responsibilities, and as we continue, as we did last year, to attempt to deal with the loss of the dividend from ML&P. It is really important for us all to recognize that the structure of the budget that we know today is going to have to change. That the mechanisms of providing services and infrastructure to the people of Anchorage has historically been done by a combination of state and municipality working together. The state's role is changing. We need to be prepared to change along with it. So in the new paradigm that exists, we'll be able to provide the services and the infrastructure that this city needs. In all, the budget is still a working document. And I say it's a working document because there are continuing to be some moving variables that we're contending with. And that's why it's imperative that you look at the document that we put in front of you as an item for us to work together on. And I think that the challenge of working together with the Assembly, with the public, is something that we can rise to. I think that embedded in the notion of working together to come up with a document that reflects the community direction and community values. We can not only arrive at a document that achieves a degree of consensus, we can show perhaps our friends at the state level that there are ways for even people who have different positions and different philosophical approaches, that when you work together, you can arrive at some kind of fiscal solution. So that all being said, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Wilbur.
And before you begin, Mr. Moore, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Starr had his hand up. And
Just
I'm
for
about to-
clarity, Madam Chair and Budget Chair, I've noticed the other work sessions are scheduled already. Are we gonna have opportunity to work with individual department heads, or how would you like us to tackle?
There's going to be 2 additional work sessions. This is just a preview
Sure.
of the 2017.
In history, we've had department heads have spoke about their aspect of the budget. The police and fire chief, for example, come in front of us for a different question and answer period. Will we have that opportunity in weeks to come?
We will, and I'd like to continue that discussion with you offline.
Fair
If it's
enough.
okay, because I want to move on with this. work
Lastly, is
session.
this recorded today?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Starr. And I just want to let folks know that the administration has asked that we hold questions until the end of the presentation, and I would really like to honor that request, and I hope it's okay with everyone.
Yeah, I might have to leave, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Please,
Lane's prepped out there, Mr. Starr.
Ready to go.
Mr. Wilbur, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I'd like to do today is just, as the mayor's mentioned, to kind of review the assembly, the good situation that we are as a result of the management of 2016, sort of highlight some of the situations that we're in more specifically, and then we have a proposal on where we would take reductions from departments, and then some ideas for revenues, and then talk a little bit about our proposed capital budget, and then very briefly highlight what's going on with the utilities. And then at the end, a schedule that we have moving forward. Again, this is really a high-level presentation on how the ingredients that we have to build our 2017 budget, and as the mayor mentioned, a challenge for sure, working to try to get out of that $40 million hole that we were in due to a variety of mechanisms. So again, what I want to start off with is just really thanking the departments for the work that they've done to manage 2016 and not kind of put us a little bit more detriment. We asked them to do 2 things. One was, really reduce their spend. The Budget Advisory, Budget and Finance Committee, we mentioned that to them before. So at the end of 2016, we expect a projected savings of about $1.3 million, and then that number will obviously change as we close out 2016. This slide looks probably familiar for those of you who saw a briefing last week from the mayor about some of the state challenges that we face. In total, it's just a combination of the revenues that we have received in the past. Our revenue sharing this year is about 9.2. Next year it'll be down about $4.7 million. We're aware of the PFE garnishments and how that will be affecting our municipality. The dividend that we've received in the past will not be, again, part of this budget. And then a combination of public safety costs that have been burdened to the municipality as a result of some of the actions of the state. Most of that is in relation to the municipality taking on the expense of the jail. Some of our challenges for 2017 are healthcare, and I know that there will be a follow-up presentation with the assembly schedule just on our healthcare. Our healthcare is going up, and managing our healthcare costs as it relates to the employer and the employee. We were working together to figure out how we could present a budget that was fair to both. Our labor costs, the labor is really just a roll of 2016 to 2017. We took the existing bargaining units that have an agreed upon contractual obligation for an increase. We did make some assumptions in here. We have a couple bargaining units that are occurring in negotiations. For the purposes of this budget, we assumed a 1.5% increase to those bargaining units. And obviously those conversations will continue as well. SAP, the mayor mentioned our cost to SAP. Most of the costs that when you look in your budget, you'll see that most of the costs are illustrated inside the IT department. But what you'll see here is half of that money, that $6.8 million, after go live, we start paying debt and depreciation. So almost half of that is we started paying off that debt depreciation from the beginning of the SAP project, not just the money that from the past year. So that's a significant amount of cost there. We do have a commitment to put some additional funds in the police and fire retirement contribution. It's an obligation that we're willing to make there. So these things we have to include into our budget, and we have. As the mayor mentioned, the commitment to public safety. We're looking at proposing adding 2 academies and 1 lateral for the total of about $3.4 million. This includes an additional, these are sworn officers that will be added to the force. And so, and the breakdown in your book will be available to there. The first academy would begin in June, then there will be a lateral, and then the second academy would actually begin in December. Thus the costs are a little less. Those costs include the actual labor after they graduate and while they're in training and while they're in the academy. So, probably about a month ago, when we were working to build this budget, we knew that we were going to be faced with a challenge, and how do we do that? So, the mayor's team, Mr. Abbott, municipal manager, Mr. Schutte at OECD, the CFO, those executive managers sat down and met with those departments, and we asked them collectively to come up with a proposed reduction of $5 million. And again, these were some difficult choices because many of you know that there have been a lot of reductions in the municipality in some departments over the year. A lot of efficiencies been made. So there, as the mayor mentioned, these reductions are going to affect service. We are going to see those changes. These were difficult things to propose, I believe, from the departments. These were difficult things for the administration to review, and I do think that this is an honest, earnest effort to reduce the cost of city government to come in line with the budget we have. Now, when we have a future work session, each one of these departments will have an opportunity to share with you in some detail what these costs are reducing. But I can kind of highlight for the members of the assembly today what some of these things are. The fire department, primarily, the bulk of that is a reduction in overtime labor. For finance, that's about half of that is a reduction in personnel, and about half of that is a reduction in professional services, and professional services related mostly to SAP. Finance and operations, you will see reduction in personnel in service and service as it relates to some basically delayed time in snow removal. The service will be continued, but the time in which it will actually be done will get delayed. So I think you will see some changes there. Public transportation, this reduction here will show a reduction in bus service during holidays. Employee relations is primarily non-labor, but there are some labor choices in there. The mayor's office, this is a little bit of labor and some community grants that would be addressed. Development services is personnel. So these are real challenges that we are facing right here in the library. Again, some personnel, the attorney, planning. Parks and Rec is mostly about more about service as it relates to maybe to pools and to some ice rinks. So I think they've done a great job. Again, the last PM&E and the budget office, those are personnel choices, and traffic is pretty much supplies. These were hard and well thought out as we went through each one of these things. Purchasing, I think most of these going through here, the manager's office is a little bit of non-labor, and CFO and public administration, a little bit of non-labor. I noted IT here. IT did offer reductions. They had about $260,000 in a reduction, but when you add the SAP cost to that, in total, there aren't any reductions in the IT. But they did offer some, and you will see those in your AM support and your budget itself. So the total department proposed reductions, proposed cuts is $4.3 million. And that is, as it's illustrated in those previous slides. So again, these are some choices that we're looking forward to discussing with you. Looking at our fuel, We budget our fuel based on previous year prices. In this case, we looked at what our actual prices, what our actual costs were, really took a fine-tuned review at this one. We believe that we can lower our budget in the fuel by about $1.1 million. And then as it relates to the fleet, we're gonna, we're gonna ask our departments the amount of cost that they charge into the fleet will be reduced by $2 million for a total of department reductions or cuts of about $7.4 million. So some difficult choices for sure, and I know that we'll, during our future work sessions, we'll talk about each one of these with a lot more detail. The mayor mentioned, so now that we know where we're starting, we're trying to do everything we can to recover from that deficit of resources that we have, and some of the ideas that we're bringing forward here, some of them new, some of them not. Marijuana. Marijuana is in our current budget. We've increased the amount that, or the assumption that we would receive in marijuana. We've got some revised estimations from Treasury. When you really look at what's going on in the Mat-Su bill and how they may or may not be entertaining the sale and distribution of marijuana, and the same thing on the peninsula. Maybe Anchorage might need to do a little better there. Use of NISA is up from last year, and that's primarily related to Plant 2A. And that one goes online, we'll be able to accommodate. That's about half of that $5.5 million. Our tax base, when you look at our just regular formulation for how we calculate our tax base, our tax revenues would be an increase of 4.6. Dividends. So this is a proposal that we would receive some dividends from solid waste, and then the last item, or the next item there, savings from 2015. We would be using part of our savings that we currently have to fill that gap to get to a balanced budget by using $8.9 million from savings in 2015. And then talking to the CFO, we're able to get a little bit of increase in our investment earnings. So we're looking forward to those as well. So the last few slides, these next couple here, these is really sort of a highlight, review, and summary of our budget. 2016, where we are right now, we have spent inside our 2016 budget about $497 million. Our proposed budget is $502. It's about a 1% increase. The position count, currently we have about 2,272. With the police sworn officers, that gets us to 2,309. And then our tax base would go, this is the base calculation we use to adjust our tax collections from 266 to 721. As you note here that the tax base is not all of the funding of our municipal budget. It's only a portion of it, but an important portion of it. So when you look at sort of how that tax base summary works out for property taxes, in 2016 we used a base of $266.5 million. In the proposed budget it would be $271. When you look at how we collect those taxes, some of it's a proportion of how much new construction we're adding and how much was in the previous tax base. So that's how the split would, in the proposed budget, how it would be received. And in this proposed budget, if it was approved as it is today, it would be a $12.67 increase per 100,000, or about $46 per average household. So that's a lot of information, and I know that we'll be talking a little bit more about the budgets. And if I could, Madam Chair, just maybe I have a couple more slides, and then we can open it up to questions.
I'd like you to finish, but since you paused for a moment for the budget, I'd like to recognize that Mr. Kaufman and Mr. Middleton have joined us. Please continue.
So the administration is proposing a bond for 2017 for general government. It's $46.88 million. It's pretty close to the proposal that we had last year, and frankly, the types of projects that are in the proposed bond are very much the same. If I could just highlight some of these facility improvements, really what we're looking to do there is maintain the infrastructure that we currently have in place. There's a lot of roof repairs that are located in there. There's some improvements to fire station maintenance facility, animal control, and then there's a project out in Government Hill to remove some asbestos and improve sprinkler system. The fire department.
Sorry, I'm not sure what you said.
I said that. Thank you, Siri. Under the fire department, they're looking to propose a bond for 2.45. We're looking at a couple engine replacements and 2 ambulances. For Parks and Recreation, they have 12 projects listed inside their proposed improvements. Some improvements in Fairview, some improvements down in the South Anchorage Sports Complex, continued improvements on the Chester Creek or the Campbell Creek Trail. There's some additional improvements in Midtown, so a good mix, and I think Mr. Rod has done a great job there. The police department, really what they're looking for is some perimeter security and some improvements towards their training center out in the Diamond area. For the roads program, again, we have the road program, and this is going to be including all transportation. So some of the highlights that you'll be looking at is we have a proposal to work on 100th Avenue between C Street and Minnesota, Dubin between Patterson and Moline. We also have streetlight improvements, alley improvements, a lot of other improvements all across the municipality of Anchorage. And then transit, very familiar. We're looking for some match money for bonds. The primary project is the improvement to the 7th and C bus stop across from the federal building, and then they have some other improvements as well. So I think when you review the bond proposal, many of the projects will look familiar from our CIB from last year as well. So just maybe some highlights of what's going on in AWU. Many of you are aware of, on the Enterprise Committee, AWU continues to really focus their investments in maintaining the 1,600 miles of pipe they have under the ground. And you'll see those continue. I think their proposed capital budget is about $23 million. For Merrill Field, I think their operations are going to continue very similar to they have in the past. Their significant capital project is a rehab to the Quebec taxiway and then on an apron. ML&P, obviously they have a new piece of equipment that they're going to be maintaining and operating, so I know they have some changes that they'll be working there. The Port of Anchorage is going to continue to maintain their operations as they have in the past. And for solid waste services, pretty much the same. I think the one key investment they have down there, they're looking to put some money into their transfer center in Midtown. So a lot of activity going on, a lot of good work, both by the departments themselves and we look forward to working with the assembly. So I mentioned there are some proposed work sessions and public hearings next week. If not next week, we're looking to have a presentation on healthcare. We'll talk a little bit more about dividends, and then as Mr. Starr requested, that will be the conversation when we start with details of each individual department. We'll start with general government, and then those that have capital budgets, we'll do those at the same time. Public hearing, first one is up at the end of October. We'll have another work session, second public hearing, and then obviously there's a lot to work on. So this is the schedule that we have in our proposed. So Madam Chair, thank you for your time and attention, and that's all I have.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Chang is on the list.
Lance, you're talking personnel cuts. I want a listing by department, how many positions we're talking about. Whether these are fictitious cuts or not filled positions, or real positions that are gonna be gone.
Okay.
Because I know it was an issue with the state when they said we're taking personnel cuts, but they're not really cuts, it was not filled. So I want a listing of personnel cuts by department, and I want to know whether they're unfilled positions or positions that have living bodies in them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. Mr. Dunbar.
So, Mr. Wilbur, on the capital budget slide, you all state that the proposal is $46.88 million on the bonds.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I have two questions. The first is, how much are we scheduled to retire during that same period? And the second is a smaller question on the roads. Does that include any general funds for traffic calming? I know the state has provided, at least in my area, some funds for traffic calming in the past, but those funds have gone away. So those are my two questions.
So the first question is, the debt reimbursement's about 37 or 38 million, I think is what we're looking at.
Debt retirement.
Debt retirement, thank you, Mr. Abbott. And then your second question, Mr. Dunbar, there is the traffic department currently has traffic calming money that they're working on. I don't believe there's any additional resources in the bond, but I will confirm.
So the traffic calming is in their regular budget versus the bond?
Yeah, it's not being reduced.
And they still have state grants that they're working with as well.
Right, the remainder.
Anything else, Mr. Dunbar?
No, that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Lusky?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lance, when we're talking about the MLMP dividend that you have listed here at $7.5 million, we knew about this in the 2016 budget, and we built it into the 2016 budget, correct?
Okay.
So, if we already knew last year, when we built last year's budget and already accounted for it, why are we highlighting this as a number as far as 2017's challenges? Because we knew we weren't gonna get it, we didn't get it last year.
But we told you last year that we were going to try to get it for 2017, and that effort has not been successful.
Well, that was an appeal basically of the RCA's decision, right?
Yeah, and there had been discussion, the Assembly had encouraged us to file a new rate case, if you will, or start a new docket. That did not occur for a variety of reasons that we're assuming we'll be talking to you more specifically about on October 15th. But we're simply reporting that we had hoped, and I know the Assembly had hoped, that we could recover the dividend in 2017. And our budget, in any case, our proposal, does not assume that.
Okay, well, I don't want you to presume that you're speaking for the whole Assembly. Some of us who read the RCA case had no expectation we would get that $7.5 million. So when I see that listed as part as our budget gap, I look at that as inflating the number of our budget gap, because some of us never expected it. So when we already account for it last year, I think it's kind of a misrepresentation to include it in this year's number. But the $40 million, now I'm curious as to the exact breakout of why you're saying we have a $40 million hole. Do you have that broken down for us?
So I was trying to summarize it in the first two slides.
Are you adding together that 15 and a
Yeah.
15.4 plus
And
this 19.2?
these are the highlights of that 40.
Okay, so that's what I was trying to get at. So, I totally get the revenue sharing, the PFD garnishments, because you're anticipating this is the money you're not gonna collect.
Correct.
Public safety, obviously, when you had that 1.4 million, you're assuming these are fines and fees that aren't going to be paid because of, is that what you're assuming?
From the public safety?
Yeah.
But that includes the jail.
Okay, so the Department of Corrections, the almost $1 million.
Yeah. that
Yeah.
9
It's a combination of revenue loss and expense increase.
That's right.
Okay, it would help me if, you could just break out some of these challenges for me, so I know exactly, I know we've talked about it in the Budget and Finance Committee hearings, meetings before, but it would be nice just to, the labor costs, for example, when we're saying $7.7 million more in labor costs, obviously healthcare is broken out, right? So I appreciate that. That one is pretty self-explanatory. When we're talking about labor, I would like a little bit more clarification on what's going up in labor costs. Is it because we have more police, more employees, and that's what's driving it, or is it because of?
It's primarily when you take the existing positions that we have and you can bargain units that are in, that we have agreed, and we roll those into 2017.
Oh, it's all the raises that we.
Yeah, the
that are built in.
1.5% that's included in those bargaining units.
Okay.
That's the majority of it.
Okay, so it's the majority of the raises that we have issued, okay. So that really helps. Now, the police and fire retirement contribution, can you give me a little clarification on what's going on there, 3.5 or 3.3 million?
Sure, and I can take this one. Yeah. About 20 years ago, the municipality settled a long-standing dispute with the police and fire retirement system. And an element of that settlement was that when that program is not fully funded, less than 100% fully funded, that the municipality will make supplemental contributions to it every year in order to help it recover towards 100%. There's a a formula that is used to do that. In 2016, we paid $7 million to meet that obligation. In 2017, that obligation is 10.3. So that is, the 3.3 is not the full amount of the distribution. It's 10 million. 3.3 is the increase over the prior year. So that's where that stems from. We've been making these supplemental contributions of about this scale, between $5 and $10 million, since the market crash of 2008, when the retirement funds asset value dropped, and it has not yet fully recovered from that.
Okay. I'm trying to understand in here, at the last budget finance meeting, when the mayor spoke, he was talking about the challenges in basically, I'm remembering about plowing. Essentially, the state has sold some of their plowing resources, now the municipality's gonna take over some of those, plowing sidewalks and fiscal lanes and stuff. And so where is that projected increase reflected in here? Is that under labor too? Or, I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to bring together both presentations and understand where those numbers are.
So
I can talk about the plowing piece. We were not proposing to add any money to our budget to accept more responsibility for state roads. We were going to hold our program steady and absorb some diminution in the service to municipal roads as a result of that. So we were going to take the existing resources that we had, the 2016 level resources, and we were basically just going to spread them thinner, and we were going to respond a little less quickly throughout Anchorage, whether we were plowing a state road or a muni road. That was our plan. Then, and that remains our plan. In light of what we're facing for 2017, we asked the whole maintenance and operations department, the largest group of which is the street maintenance group, to propose additional reductions. And that's the bulk of what you see here under M&O. That's a combination of a little bit of reductions in their fleet and facility maintenance programs, but primarily a reduction in their street maintenance program. And that will further reduce our level of winter maintenance effort. And to a certain degree, our summer or shoulder season effort as well. But most of it hits in the winter time. And it'll depend on the amount of snow we get as to how much of an impact that makes. In rough order of magnitude, our assumption is that our current 72-hour plow out goal probably will become an 80 or 84-hour plow out goal under this proposal.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Abbott, that's very helpful. Now my last question is about SAP. Last year, we transitioned $2 million worth of labor of SAP into the capital budget. So when you say there's an increase of $6.8 million for SAP, you're strictly only speaking about the operating budget, is that correct?
Correct.
And do we still, I forget if there's 12 or more employees that were working on SAP that we put into the capital budget last year, are those employees, or those contractors' employees' positions, are they still in the capital budget? Or has that been something that has expired?
For this budget, we assume that we will not, after go live, those positions were put in place for backfill. Once we go live, we won't need all of that backfill. So we left some resources in our operating budget to support some of that, and we'll be working with those departments that need it, but not all of those resources are going to continue in 2017, because after we go live, we shouldn't need as much backfill.
So, just to clarify, there's two different SAP workforce allocations. One is for the capital project, the portion that gets us to go live. That is funded in the capital program. And although the bodies live in the operating budget, and you'll see the PCNs and the headcount there, they're funded through the capital program. And that's not uncommon. There's lots of departments that have staff that are funded by capital projects. On or around July 1, which is sort of the nominal date. That's not the exact date of go live, but that's what we're using for planning purposes. The capital project commitment will end. Will be live. At that point, if any departments want to maintain those staff, they'll need to cover them in their operating budgets. And we have not fully funded those positions. So most of those positions will have to be eliminated at that point. What the SAP line here is in the operating budget, the increase on the operating side, primarily in the IT department, the IT department will need more staff than they currently have now in order to operate SAP going forward. So the 6.8 million that you see here is a combination of the debt service that we will pay, and we'll only pay a half year's worth of debt service because go live is July 1. So in 2018, it'll be even larger than this, at least the debt service component will be. And then there are several new positions funded here as well that IT will begin to hire up shortly after the beginning of the year to support the system after it is live. And that is likely to be a continuing operating budget expense going forward.
That's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Emmett.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Peters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Wilbur, when you were talking about cuts on page 4, I didn't catch what the planning department and the park and recreation department, what those cuts coming from.
So the planning department is primarily a staff of the personnel, and then Parks and Rec gets a little reduction from their service. I believe it's related to pools and to ice rinks.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the presentation, Lance. The slide, the 2017 tax base summary, where you have the amount per 100,000 of taxes estimated, the 1267. Do you know what that number was last year?
How much they went up last year?
Or how much
The number
they're,
was-
or this is projecting what they'll be this year? If you know what it was last year, for that per 100,000.
I actually think it's less.
Well, remember, the 1267 is just the amount we're going up. That's the increase over the prior year.
1267 is the increase. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, 1267 per 100K.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr.
And just
Steele?
clarification, this does not include the school district, the taxes required property taxes for the school district, or the debt service component for either the muni or the school district.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Steele?
I'm gonna go again unless somebody else wants to go.
Mr. Steele?
I'm fine.
Okay. Mr. Starr?
We did first quarter budget discussions as well that got us through this year, if you will. Have we accurately projected the cost of our police department with new officers coming online this year?
Yes.
And so we're comfortable how we're gonna end the year in terms of being, I know it can't be helped, but no additional appropriations to
For
fill.
AD for this year?
Yeah, how about fire? Is there any appropriations necessary to meet the budget?
Not that I'm aware of.
We expect, we're not aware of any departments at this point that will require a supplemental appropriation. Barring something significant changing in the last 3 months, we expect to bring each of the department budgets in at or under, maybe just under, their 2016 authorization.
The fund balance reserves that we set aside for emergency ops as well as just our bonding help, you haven't made any changes to those that we currently.
The percentages?
Yeah, have you been watching what they are? Are we 12.5 total numbers
Yeah,
set
I mean,
aside?
I think
12. 12 is what our fund
10
balance
to-
policy currently requires. As you know, because the base against which the 12% is calculated typically increases, the amount necessary to meet that requirement actually requires us to move $2 million from unrestricted fund balance into restricted fund
So it'll
balance
hold up that 12.
to stay at 12%.
Madam Chair, 2 more questions if you don't mind.
Certainly, Mr. Starr.
The 56 sworn officer program for next year, it's roughly, your cost estimates is about $56,000 per position. I'm not certain how we're gonna get 56 positions added to that. Do any of them consider the academy? Is there one this year yet?
The December Academy will work with attrition to help the attrition in 2017.
I see.
The June and the December are growth academies. They also have a lateral academy that will also assist.
And what is the definition of a lateral academy? What are we talking about there?
That would be where candidates that are already Alaska sworn officers from other departments would be hired at Anchorage Police Department. And it's a radically less intense academy that's required for them. In fact, it's almost more of on-site training rather than an academy process.
So the 56, let me ask the question again so I clearly know the answer. Is the 56 anticipating some of those officers that are graduating this year to complement the 56 number, or are we moving forward with another goal of 56 total employees by the end of next year?
This December academy is basically covering attrition for next year. There's 2 academies next year are growing the force.
Okay. And so the finances for that, then we've anticipated the need for the police cars and all the other stuff that comes with them, but I also saw you backed off the payroll a little bit in the anticipation that December academy or something won't fully burden the payroll ideally.
Well, the positions that are, those positions that are currently rolling over to 2017,
Yeah.
when they attrition out, we're already budgeted for those. It's just that the academy will take those resources and fund those positions.
Mhm.
It's the new academies where we've added resources for the new positions
All right.
that we've added the fund to.
And just a point of pontification perhaps, in years past, Mayor, you started the comments that we gutted the budget or things like that. We have a responsibility there. In our cases, we can fund the budgets and you as mayor can choose to not spend the money. So in multiple cases over the police department budgeting, we actually funded it and academies were not held. So I'll bear the responsibility of not forcing the administrations to hire and promote officers. We oftentimes got reasons that they weren't available at the time or they were frustrating, but I'm not certain that gutting the department was intentional as it much was our policy is to fund it and you get to spend it. So that's why I emphasize the goal on the 56 officers is I know Mr. Honeman and I were really creative in ways that we could facilitate that goal. So keep reaching out to us. If you can't make it, we'll figure out new ways to help you fund it. But let's not be surprised if the cop cars aren't included or the uniforms or whatever. Let's get that number out there and really talk about it. So that's why I want to talk to department heads, particularly later on, is to make sure their needs are met, as well as communicate that reach out message to Madam Chair, is that if it's 56, we'll help you make it. If it's fully funded, we'll hold you to that commitment. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Whittlesley?
I just want, where are the service areas budgets in here in particular? Are you Girdwood?
They're not listed here. We are proposing, I believe, to fund them as they have requested to be funded.
Those numbers aren't in here. Though.
Right. They don't count towards our, we don't include them in the tax cap. That they're not part of the tax cap. They're not part of this conversation. So at this point, the Chugiak service areas, Girdwood, the limited road service areas are all funded as they have requested to be funded.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Whittlesley. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you. And I really appreciate the kind of framing you guys have done here, laying out the challenges we face, and particularly, Mr. Abbott, the discussion you had with Ms. Nabosky, which I was going to ask you about with the snow removal. Because, as you indicate, when we are making these cuts, it means actual reductions in service, and people are actually going to see and feel that. And looking at, it's not page numbers here, but for us it's page 5, you're talking about additional revenues. You have $8.9 million plugging this gap in the savings from 2015. And, you know, when the three of us came on, the freshmen, one of the things we immediately did, and sort of a baptism by fire, was pass the desire for property tax relief, but we pushed it out because, for exactly this reason, because we were worried about what the state would do. And so my question is, do we still think we can do that property tax reduction, or is that consumed by this number?
As you mentioned, we ended 2015 with approximately $15 million of unrestricted fund balance. above and beyond what it takes to meet our fund balance obligations, what we sort of call restricted fund balance. The Assembly and the administration, we've spent a couple million of that to plug holes, the police litigation, transferring some money back over to a capital program, et cetera. So there's around 13 million, give or take, rough order of magnitude, in unrestricted fund balance available now. What the administration's proposal does is spend approximately 9 million of that to address the 2017 budget. That means there's a remaining amount of unrestricted fund balance of 3 to 5 million for discussion purposes. A lot depends on how 2016 finishes over the last 3 months. We are not recommending at this time that any of that be planned to be used for property tax relief. We think that in light of what we're facing in terms of continued uncertainty with the state and other potential uncertainties, that we should maintain some level of unrestricted fund balance to address needs in the future. We understand there's an interest on the Assembly's part in doing that, and if you all identify other savings opportunities or other revenue sources that we should take advantage of, and then we will actively work with you to potentially support that. But given the cost structure that we've presented and the revenue system that we're planning for right now, we do not recommend any diversion of fund balance to tax relief.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Train.
Mr. Abbott, you're talking about reducing regularity of snow plowing to what, 80 hours now?
I'm going to say that right now our likely commitment would be, if this was funded, that we would commit plow outs to 84 hours.
84 hours. Then I would like from you just to keep it at that level now. Let me know how much we're doing this for what's current.
It's going to be around $700,000, maybe somewhere between 700 and $1 million.
Because unlike the state,
No, excuse me. It'll be between $500,000 and $800,000.
because unlike the state's rule, we realize we're winter city. When I hear the state wants to cut back their plowing, we also need a listing of all the roads. You get it to us from the state that they're not going to plow, because we're the ones who are going to get calls from our constituents that can't get down the road because the state has plowers. And when we add delaying our time frame, we're not going to have real happy constituents come this winter.
So I'm not aware of any state roads that someone is not going to plow. What we're currently in the final stages of completing with the state is an agreement over who's going to plow them. And I believe that the outcome of this will be that the municipality will plow more state roads than the state will plow muni roads. And so we are taking a disproportionate share of the current lane miles that require winter maintenance in Anchorage right now.
But give us any money for doing that, are they?
No.
Thank you,
We're
Mr. Train.
doing it because the community expects it.
When this is worked out, give the Assembly the list of roads, will you, that we're now going to maintain? I appreciate it.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Training. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there's a list of departmental cuts and then public safety going up by 3 million. Am I right that public safety is the only department with any major increase in this budget?
IT and the police department.
It looked like IT was held steady, and that may require some additional cash.
The debt service for SAP, for instance, shows up in the IT budget.
Right.
So when you look at the department budgets, IT is going to show a significant increase. It is not a big increase programmatically. It is just the way the costs are illustrated in their budget. APD is seeing a real increase in their functionality as a result of increased funding.
I appreciate in a tight budget time you prioritizing that and finding cuts, which I'm sure are difficult to focus those efforts in public safety. And as Mr. Trainey said, sometimes you can cut through some of the numbers with the body count. So on your, well, it's my page 6, but we're going down 19 positions in non-public safety, and we're going up 56 sworn officers. Those are actual positions?
Correct. Our plan is to start a 28-person academy in June at APD and another 28-position academy in December to be potentially offset with laterals that might, to the extent we can hire laterals, we will hire them and reduce the academy counts accordingly.
And does that put from roughly 350 to 400 officers on, or is it really just managing attrition of that amount or some smaller amount?
We expect to end the year with the academy that starts in December, and a lot depends on how many folks we get in. And including the academy students, as well as the officers that are in the field training status and the officers that are on the street, we expect to end the year around 400 sworn officers. Then in 2017, we'll add, hopefully, 56 new positions, and there will be some attrition, and we don't know how much yet. Typically, it's between 10 and 20 officers. Some years there's been, for a variety of reasons, there's been more. Other years it's been lower. But so it's a little tough to predict the exact landing spot at the end of 2017, but we would hope that it would be between 430 and 450.
And structurally moving forward, 2018, 2019, once you get to full force, you're doing single academies because it's just replacement of attrition.
This was a big backup, or
We've
big
been doing
build-up that we had to...
3 years.
Right.
Well, and 3.5, say, of these 2 or 3 academies per year. And it's working. We are growing the department, and we're growing it both through an increase in new hires, and the chief has, for a lot of reasons, attrition has declined. So that, believe me, the cheapest way to grow the department is not to lose existing officers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's going to be our challenge as we look at areas we would like to put back in. It came at a cost of, I mean, these cuts paid for public safety increase, and so we're going to have to be careful to find a way to do that for things we want to put back that it doesn't cost those officers more than that.
We understand. Thank you, Mr. Cole. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I'm still worried about a couple items. The snow removal one, are we taking some of the state equipment? Are we getting some of that equipment?
No.
So
Although Mr. Flynn has started a conversation that might change that, but as of now, we're not planning on it.
Well, if we have to do the highways, it's going to be huge.
We're not. We are not doing the sewer to the Glen. The state will maintain that. They have specialty equipment for those purposes, and we do not. And that will not be lane miles that we will assume responsibility.
And what kind of winter are you projecting?
Winter. Grandma Abbott, her knee doesn't hurt this week, so yeah. No, we're hoping for a cheap one.
Madam Chair, if I can just quickly follow up on that specific item that Mr. Steele raised after our discussion on Friday. I sent an email to Dave Kemp, who is the Central Division Director for DOT, and Mr. Peterson's colleague on the AMAT's policy committee, and without editorializing on the decision to change the nature of the responsibilities for snow clearing, I did say that if we are in fact going to take on more responsibility for snow clearing, and that Mr. Abbott did for the Torah to me, so the questions that Mr. Traney asked are in the draft document that I've been reviewing, then I felt it was incumbent upon DOT to, if they were going to surplus equipment, to provide it to us at a discounted rate. He wrote back to me Monday morning, said he'd be back to me in a couple of days. It's Friday.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, I wonder if you got that.
Yeah, I think we need to get the word out, and if there's any press listening, in terms of preparation of the alleys, the Government Hill folks, in terms of anticipating winter and getting things cleaned up so that easily we can get through, clean things up. But I am concerned if we have a tough winter that you're gonna have some upset citizens. And anyways, it's gonna be tough to do everything.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Training? Are you done?
I know I have a couple more, but
Okay.
okay, I'm sorry.
We only got 4 minutes.
Oh, all right, 4 minutes, I'll do it quick. The port is an issue in terms of we banked the farm in terms of getting some money from the state to do the update projects at the port. I'm hoping we can hold it together over the year and or find some additional money from the federal government or something. Otherwise, we're gonna be in a bind coming down the pipe a ways.
The port's budget anticipates spending $3 or $4 million, I believe, on their pile replacement or pile
So hopefully we won't
reinforcement
have holes
program.
in the attic.
Yeah, well, we're a little late for that.
And then one more with regards to SAP. That's another one that we don't really know. We're anticipating that everything's going to go well. But when we come down the wire and we start to fire this baby up, we'll see.
Great, thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Training?
Chief, Lateral Academy, did we just run one or reject one? What do we do in Lateral?
So we have successfully brought in 4 laterals, which go through a 2-week orientation and then an accelerated field training experience. They move, instead of field training for 5 months, they can do it as quickly as about a month and a half. And most of that is becoming familiar with what the municipal ordinances are, how things are done in the city, our radio codes, things that vary from department to department. As of right now, we also have on October 12th scheduled to bring another lateral on board.
How many officers?
That'll be one person that has qualified. We have several others that are in the process, but only one is committed for October 12th.
Projecting for next year to have another Lateral Academy?
Laterals, we can kind of do it on a floating basis, and whenever we secure a qualified lateral,
Just
we
rotate
can
them in.
accommodate them into an orientation and getting ready for field training.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Training. You're welcome. Mr. Moss?
Really quick question. As far as the fire department, how many academies are you planning for the fire department next year?
0.
Okay, so this leaves me.
If I can follow
Go
up
ahead.
with that. Our recommendation with the Assembly, you saw on the capital budget, we recommend funding 2 new ambulances to make permanent what we have been testing for the last several months, what we call Medic 81 and Medic 82. The plan would be to ask the voters if they support making those permanent units and then funding both the capital cost and then the operating cost in the, authorizing the operating cost in the bond vote. So that's how we added Medic 7 down in Sand Lake several years ago. That's our recommendation. So if the voters adopted that, if our proposal was endorsed, it was on the ballot, and the voters endorsed it, then we would start an academy in June, I believe. June or July.
This time.
This time next year. Oh, by the time we did the testing and application.
That's a dangerous precedent, because what we're doing now is we're outside of the tax cap, we're adding employees, essentially what you're doing.
This would
So
have the effect of growing the tax cap,
Actually, aren't bonds outside of the tax cap?
not the O&M increment that the voters authorize along with the bonds. So we would not be borrowing money for the firefighters. Let's make that clear. But in the bond decision, typically there is an O&M increment that the charter language of the tax cap anticipates. And in this case, we will recommend that those positions be authorized, and that would have the impact of growing the tax cap by that amount of money. And we do that typically every year. This last year, we added several $100,000 to the tax cap.
Oh, I know.
In that manner.
I don't like that manner, but that's just a personal preference. So again, this is one of those things, if the voters vote this down, this is a challenge because we have cut the fire department's OT budget, but at the same time, not planned for any attrition. Or
If the voters don't support it, my expectation is we'll be back before
you're
you
gonna need a supplemental.
for some form of a supplemental.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
And we'll know that at first quarter.
Sure. My last comment is just very quickly to Mr. Roth. Talking about the attrition for APD, one of the things that nobody's talked about, this is the 20-year mark for one of the biggest academies that has been. So you're gonna have a huge class of people this time that are allowed, that are eligible for retirement just because it's the 20th anniversary of one of the biggest academies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's pretty big. So I was gonna say that's part of the reason why you can probably anticipate you'll have more retirees than maybe historically.
Could be.
Just because they had such a big class back then.
Thank you, Mr. Mosky. We're at the end of this work session, but I have a couple of comments to make real quickly. Mr. Abbott, can you please send the Torah regarding snowplow to Ms. Jones so that we can all get a copy, we're all concerned about how that's gonna work out? And also, my one question is, that in the transit capital budget, 27.5 million, does that amount include the funding that's necessary for a match for federal funds?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then I want to remind everybody that on October 21st, we have a 5-hour work session on the budget, and then we have another 5-hour work session on the 20th. So we're going to have plenty of time to ask questions and so forth. And I just want to thank you for the presentation. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I appreciate the tenor of these comments and the constructive nature of what we're doing, and if any members of the Assembly or public have further suggestions on what we could do to refine this budget, I'm more than anxious to have those conversations. And we will make the administration as available as possible for those. Because, as I said, we're living in a challenging situation, and we need to evolve the structure of how we do budgets moving forward. This budget is a work in progress, and we need to refine it. We need to also be mindful of some of the other conditions that are happening at the state level, and also internally. But I appreciate the constructive nature of this